And if it's not perfect, if it doesn't look like it was manufactured somewhere else, I'm still growing vegetables in it. It doesn't bother me one bit. Guten gardening, everybody. Today, we're gonna talk about raised bed gardens. You know, one of the things I love about this time of year is it's a time of cleanup as we prepare for the upcoming growing season. And that's part of the garden planning operation. You can see our ever-bearing raspberries here. This is our heritage red raspberry. It's so easy to see exactly where I'm going to trim these back. You can tell where it fruited last season and where I'm going to come in and trim this back even before the new sprouts all along these floricanes go ahead and develop into some delicious raspberries. But that's not actually the focus of today's video. You see, in addition to the prep work like with our perennial raspberries or cleaning out some of the parts of the garden that we left over from last season, etc., I think another part of planning is making the decision as to what you're going to be growing your vegetables and fruit in. And that could be in ground. A lot of people have the space to grow a lot of food in ground. Maybe they have really healthy, fertile soil. But for a lot of us, the soil, our native soil, is either not the best. Maybe we don't have access to soil at all because we have a lot of concrete around us. Maybe just the space wherein we find ourselves gardening isn't ideal. And so we shift over to raised beds. And here at Guten Gardening, we have quite a few raised beds, some of which were prefabricated, some of which we bought, but a lot of them are simple DIY raised beds. And I want to show you a couple of DIY raised beds today. I'm not going to go through the whole methodology of building them, but more, I'm going to encourage you to experiment around a little bit. So I'm going to be talking about how long they've lasted, the process, some of the expenses around them. And maybe if you have a DIY raised bed idea or something that you've seen that you really love, you can share it with our community in the comments as well. But I'm going to start with a couple of raised beds that are actually right over here that we didn't build ourselves. And you can actually see the depth and the size of these two raised beds, both of which we got on clearance, both of which are about six and a half years old. There's not a ton of depth to these. I think I've got about 8 or so inches of soil in each one. Not a really big footprint in the grand scheme of a raised bed. Now, a raised bed like this is going to have some added benefit that, well, really one of the main benefits of raised beds for a lot of people. This one brings you up off the ground. And so when you're doing the practice of gardening, it's not as painful on your back. And I think for those of us who have a harder time with our backs, maybe back pain, that this is something that is or can be very helpful, a very helpful aspect of raised beds in general. But one of the reasons why we don't really spend money on raised beds like this is because if we had bought those at full price, at the time I think they were going for something like $70 full price for that amount of space. Now, I'm not going to say that we haven't spent a good bit of money on other types of container gardens. Our green stalks are not inexpensive, but we've got 5 levels with those, which is a good bit more space, and we also have a good warranty with those too, but a good bit more space than what we're seeing out of here. And if I can build something, if I can build a raised bed and get way more space for less than a prefab one, and it's not going to be too expensive, then it's probably what I'm going to do. But I am going to have to acknowledge that this comes down to your ability to do this. You know, get down and decide on what it is that you want for a structure. Now, this is one of the simplest raised beds, actually one of the first raised beds when we were just trying to expand the area right beside our house. And all this is, these are some 2x10s, and they're sunk a couple inches into the ground. Now, this is untreated lumber. So what you're gonna see, and these are about 6 years old. What you're gonna see with this untreated lumber, because that's what we decided, and it's actually still a little bit frozen out here, but I think you can see it inside here. You're gonna start to see the decay, the decomposition of beds like this over a period of time. The nice thing is that these weren't all that expensive to put together. It involved a few screws and sinking it down to the ground a little bit. And when this breaks down fully, and all lumber eventually will break down, when it breaks down fully, a raised bed like this, which again isn't bringing you up off the ground too much, but it is bringing you up off the ground, a raised bed like this is easy to replace. Pull out a board here and there, and do it over a pretty simple way to gain quite a bit of raised bed space. Now, one of the main reasons, as I referenced earlier, that we would want to have a raised bed space like this is to avoid growing in some of our native soil. Maybe it's really heavy clay soil that's just hard to grow in. This gives me an opportunity to come in and create whatever mix I want and really amend soil quite easily. Now, for something like this, I was able to create the length I wanted and the width I wanted just with a simple cut at each end and get the exact size I wanted. It's not exactly something that you're going to find in most raised beds that are, again, prefabricated. I can make it whatever shape I want, and I can make it whatever height I want. So I'm going to show you now one of the ways that we got around expense, a lot of expense anyway, when it came to most of our raised beds. Here you see, and actually you can see it on the exterior of this bed, what I'm going to be talking about. This is one of our long raised beds where we built some trellising in the background. We actually built one for our neighbor as well. Right there's our compost garden. And then you can see a keyhole raised bed made out of the same material and two of our 3x6 raised beds. And I'm going to use this 3x6 raised bed because I think it's the easiest one to see. Each of these raised beds is made on the exterior out of the same material. And you can actually see the end, the dog-eared end of this material. These are cedar pickets. They're 1x6x6 foot cedar pickets. And the cedar pickets on this end are just cut in half, giving me that 3-foot width and that 6-foot length. And each of these pickets run just over $2 a piece. And we're now 5 years into growing in these beds. Now, for each of these beds, I built them 4 pickets high. That's 24 inches tall, so that I could sink them down into the ground a little bit, which gives us the need for 8 pickets total for the length. And then for the width, I would have to have another 4 pickets because, again, that's just the half of each of the pickets. So we're looking at 12 pickets. Let's say it's even $2.50 a piece. 12 pickets times $2.50 each. You're looking at about $30 in exterior materials. And of course, there are a few other materials that you need, including the 2x4s that I'm sitting on right now, because you don't want that 1 inch to be the top of your raised bed. And then the supports and the legs for these, which are also made out of 2x4s, and then the screws. But grand total, we're looking at maybe about $50 for a bed like this. And once you get started building 1 or 2 of these, you get enough screws, you're not repeating that price over and over because you're using up the older supplies. And realistically, when you build a bed like this, and I've got 18 square feet in this bed alone, 18 square feet is not going to compare in cost to a prefabricated one that is much, much smaller. In fact, I think I could probably fit 5 of those smaller beds inside just this one. And to be honest with you, I didn't go online looking for plans or anything like that. I just thought out the process for how I'd want to build these beds. This is a 6x6 foot, and you can do the math if you want to for the number of pickets that I needed for this bed. But this is a 6x6 keyhole bed. I wanted a bigger bed, but I also knew it would be kind of difficult to reach. I mean, I can kind of get over there, but kind of difficult to reach the entire area. So we decided on a keyhole bed. I played around a little bit with the design in my mind. I wrote it out on a sheet of paper, and I came up with a bed that has produced more sweet potato and potato than just about anywhere else in our garden. Same material, and yes, you can see the wear over time. We're about 4 years in on this one. You see the 2x4s here on the top cracking a little bit. Those are easily replaced at little cost, I would argue. And what I've found is that our cedar planks have been holding on really well. They do sell a treated version of this. It's a little bit more expensive, and I suppose would last a good bit longer. Our neighbor actually put some paint on the exterior of his to try to keep it lasting a little bit longer. But from my point of view, there's not really anything wrong with what I've got going on right here. I mean, it's still nice and solid all these years in now. And I'm thinking to myself, if this bed, which is a little bit bigger bed, cost me about $80 to build, if my 2x12 foot beds over here, my raised beds, with the trellising that I built, cost me about $80 to build, and if that lasts for, let's say, 10 years, that's not that expensive year over year to get something that is custom, something that fits the spot that I have, that fits exactly where I want it to go. And it really wasn't that difficult to draw out and put together. And if it's not perfect, if it doesn't look like it was manufactured somewhere else, I'm still growing vegetables in it. It doesn't bother me one bit. And actually, I think they look quite nice. Now, if you don't have access to the lumber, you don't believe you're the handy type, and you want to go even easier when it comes to raised beds, well, there's plenty of other options out there for you. I've done a video where I talked about a simple raised bed using something as simple as terrace board to create a raised bed effect so that you can, again, add your own soil, add your own mix, amend, and make it easier to grow in. And we've definitely done content where we've said, you know what a great raised bed is? It's going to be really inexpensive. Growing in bales of hay or growing in bales of straw. There are so many options out there, and I think that that's so important to consider. You don't have to spend a ton of money, but it does provide a lot of opportunity or options for you, especially if you have a limited amount of space, you need something specific to that space, a specific size, a specific shape. There are lots of ways around just buying prefabricated raised beds, and I 100% encourage you to give DIY raised beds in all their forms a second look, because if you haven't grown in raised beds, you haven't tried building your own, there's something special about that too. It's just like gardening in general. When I think about gardening in general, I think about the success at the end that comes from picking a vegetable you've grown, picking a fruit that you've grown. There's something special about that. Well, on top of that, there's something extra special about creating a growing space like we did with our indoor raised bed garden. Creating a growing space that you can have fun with, that you can experiment around with and say, you know, I built that. I think that's really cool. And if it doesn't work right the first time, well, if you use screws, you can always unscrew it and try something different. I've had a lot of fun with our raised beds over the years. I'm really glad that we have them, really glad that we built them, and I encourage you to give raised bed gardening a try as well. Lots of benefits, little downside, and if you do it yourself, you can save a lot of money. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.